So we were looking at documents relating to product usage and treatment policies. If we could go next to WITN 2658002. And if we could go to the second page, you'll see this is a document authored by Dr. Main called A Synopsis of Haemophilia re Mr. Malachi Devlin. And you'll recall, so we looked at this in some detail during the Belfast hearings when we had evidence about Mr. Devlin from his family. But for today's purposes, I'm going to see what the report says more widely about treatment policies. And so if we could go to page 14, please. Under the heading at the just over halfway down the page, choice of material for usage in NIHC, so Northern Ireland Haemophilia Centre. Policy was adopted in 1977, this says, which doesn't quite accord with what we've seen elsewhere. It concerned the usage of commercial factor VIII material. As far as was practical, one brand was used for the home treatment patients and a second brand for those unsuitable for home treatment. Depending upon availability and the patient's clinical situation, the policy would be maintained. Just pausing there, you'll see the other documents we've looked at tended to suggest this was a rigidly adhered to policy. This suggests that it may not have always been possible to adhere to it, and that's borne out by what we'll look at in a few minutes in terms of the annual returns. So if possible, a home treatment patient would continue on the same brand, even should he become an inpatient for emergency or planned surgery. So again, that's said to be if possible. Additionally, it was felt important to try and treat all children with locally prepared cryoprecipitate in the first instance to avoid hepatitis. So that's the reason given in this report for the usage of cryoprecipitate for children. We go to the next page. I should say the date of this report is the 6th of November 1989, and again, it's authored by Dr. Main. So we see Dr. Main saying this: cryobilin, immunolimited Vienna, was selected for the home treatment patients due to its ready solubility and ease of preparation. Again, no reference there to anything about donor pools or donor source. The decision taken at that time was the personal one of the director, who felt that it might be prudent to restrict heavy users to only one product. It was not possible to place all the haemophilic patients on home treatment, only those patients with good accessible veins, a reasonable intelligence, and who had someone available at home throughout the 24-hour period to help with the administration of the material could be included. There was an almost equal number of non-home treatment patients who were treated with the second brand, Haemophil, manufactured by Travenol Limited USA. Haemophil was the first commercial product which entered the United Kingdom. It was used in the Northern Ireland Haemophilia Centre in the early 1970s, and at that time had proven to be life-saving. It had less good solubility than cryobilin, and thus was more suitable for hospital usage when professionals were available to carry out its preparation. And when continuing down the page, from time to time when emergencies occurred, the quantities of material needed and the likely duration of the period of treatment had to be considered. It was difficult to maintain large stocks of material. In general, there was more haemophil in stock than cryobilin, as much of the latter material was distributed in the home treatment patients' own refrigerators throughout the province. And then she goes on to observe that in 1970, Mr. Devlin was treated with haemophil rather than cryobilin. And then she says this: an unforeseen difficulty occurred in late 1982, and in particular throughout 1983. Due to increased demands for European origin cryobilin on a worldwide basis, standing orders were unable to be met, and as a consequence, a third brand of material was introduced to the Haemophilia Centre in the Royal Victoria Hospital. The third material was Factor VIII, produced by Armour Limited, USA. And then she goes on to document Mr. Devlin's own treatment. And so you'll see there that rather than, as the witness statement had suggested, it being in the late 80s that a third product had to be introduced, the closer in time material suggests that it was due to an inability to obtain sufficient cryobilin that the third concentrate, commercial concentrate, Factor VIII, was introduced in the early 1980s, in particular 1983. if we then look at one further contemporaneous document before we turn briefly to Factor 9 and then to the annual returns, Seamus, IPSN 40332_021, please. This is an internal note from, it's DRW, I think that's Mr. Williams of Speywood, 19th of October 1978. Sorry, if we just look at the bottom of the page for a moment. You'll see the initials DRW, and we'll see the date 19th of October 1978. And then if we go to the top of the page, we just go higher to the very top, thank you. We see the heading, Meeting with Dr. Main, the Royal Victoria Hospital, Belfast, October the 10th, 1978. So this appears to have been the Speywood representative's visit to Dr. Main, and he is recording this. This is the only haemophilia centre in Northern Ireland, and there are 120 patients on the books. 45 are severe and 12 have inhibitors. Dr. Main is not prepared to change her present policy concerning human factor 8. She uses haemophil for operations and immuno for home treatment, and it's said then to be 22 patients. She realises this is an expensive policy, but feels that treatment changes are something best avoided with haemophiliacs. She is very concerned about liver enzyme changes, so that's what's recorded as about this meeting here, but at least she knows what to expect with products which have been used for some years. There is also loyalty to haemophil because Baxter obviously gave her considerable financial help in the early days. Nonetheless, I will be quoting for an annual contract, hoping that our price will be sufficiently lower to awaken her interest. The one thing she would not tell me was her current buying in price. So what the reference is to current financial help is not currently known. And I should, in fairness to Dr. Main, note that she wasn't asked about this, hasn't been asked about this at this stage. So we don't know what she would say in relation to that. Continues on to say that she has 2 serious VW patients, one of whom had 300,000 units of human last year. Dr. Main is very keen to look at our proposed product in this area. She feels FIBA is of little value, but believes Ritz's frequent low human dose discipline for inhibitors to be a benefit. However, in her view, animal has a definite place, and she would like to study the PE material. And we'll come back to what Dr. Main thought of and what use she made of the high 8C porcine product a little later. Dr. Main has a very open personality and is a very good source of information. We must keep in touch. So in any event, we see there what Mr. Williams' understanding was of Dr. Main's approach as at October 1978. And in particular, he appears to have picked up a concern about liver enzyme changes. Just to complete the picture in relation to interactions with Mr. Williams around this time, if we go to IPSN 40332_019. Sorry, Seamus, my apologies. Could we go first of all to IPSN 40332_020? We can see there's an exchange of correspondence. Mr. Williams writing to Dr. Main on the 6th of November 1978, referring to the visit, and then inviting her in the second paragraph to be whether he could persuade her to use some coate, so a fourth commercial concentrate, and he sets out what the price would be and sets out what he perceives to be certain advantages of it. If we go to Dr. Main's reply, IPSN 40332_019. She writes in the second paragraph, second sentence, it may be possible that I'll be reconsidering the financial expenditure regarding the purchase of factor 8 concentrates to treat our haemophilic patients. If there's any change in my policy, I shall not hesitate to get in touch with you. And then, if we go to IPSN 40332_017. We picked this up now a few weeks later in early 1979, and again Dr. Main's writing to Mr. Williams Spaywood, and she says in the second paragraph, I'm most interested in the prices that you're now quoting for Co-8 during the forthcoming year. I think they are competitive, but regret to inform you that they are not quite so favourably competitive as our present contracts with the two commercial Factor 8 firms. However, I've had long discussions with my senior chief medical laboratory scientific officer in the blood bank with the following results. It seems likely that our home treatment programme will expand and that our needs for commercial Factor 8 may expand further due to increasing orthopaedic operations, etc., being carried out on the site. Therefore, Mr. Carville and myself agree that should expansion become necessary, we will be happy to place a further order with your firm for any additional supplies of Factor 8 that will become necessary. I appreciate this is a further ray of hope, but trust you'll keep in touch and look forward to hearing further about your porcine material. So that's her communication in relation to the possibility of purchasing Co-8 in the future. And then Mr. Williams wrote to Dr. Main in February explaining that there was a price reduction in terms of the current stocks of Co-8 because of Qatar were changing the packaging style. And we can see Dr. Main's response to that at IPSN 40332_015. So this is a letter of the 16th of February 1979 to Mr. Williams, referring to the letter I've just mentioned, which informed her of a price reduction for some current stocks. And she says, I've asked Mr. John Carville, Chief MedLab Scientific Officer, to place an order through the pharmacy for 30,000 units of the 970 packs. I'd be grateful if you would reserve this quantity for us until receipt of the order. Persistence is usually rewarded. So an order placed for Co-8 in February 1979, so an additional commercial concentrate introduced. In terms of Factor 9 concentrates, we can perhaps pick this up in one of Dr. Main's statements. It's WITN 0736005. And if we could go, I'm not sure of the page number, it's paragraph 3.3, please, Seamus. So if we go on a couple of pages, go to the next page. Sorry, if we keep going. And keep going. It's a very long set of subparagraphs, numbered to 2. Yes, if we go to the next page. Thank you. So if we look at 3.3.2, this is the position in relation to Factor 9. She says this, during the early 1970s, there was no concentrate or product available designed specifically to treat patients with haemophilia B. In order to ameliorate this situation, I contrived to produce locally a product to correct the Factor 9 deficiency. And then she explains that she took her research to Dr. Bidwell in Oxford. She was initially left with a flea in her ear, she says, but then got a call from Dr. Bidwell who said her research was amazing. That's paragraph 3.3.3. But it was too late for implementation. And then the last few lines of paragraph 3.3.3, Dr. Main says this, at the conclusion of our phone call, she suggested that Oxford would send us in Northern Ireland some of their own Factor 9 concentrate. At the time, it was not freely available, and Northern Ireland was fortunate to receive such material manufactured from volunteer plasma in England. And then in the next paragraph, she says that commercial products, so commercial Factor 9 products, were not introduced until the mid-1980s when UK suppliers were unable to cope with demand. So NHS Factor 9 from Oxford is what Dr. Main says was used for the treatment of those with haemophilia B. So I want to turn next, sir, to the annual returns and see what they tell us about actual product use. we have a number of annual returns. So if we start with the first that we have, which is for 1976, it's HCDO 5054_006. If we look at the top of the page, we can see its annual return for 1976. Materials used to treat patients having haemophilia or Christmas disease. The director is Professor Nelson. Dr. Main's name is also there. Total number of haemophilic patients treated during the year 37. Number with antibodies 6. Total number of Christmas disease patients treated during the year 7, crossed out 6. That's not 76, it's 6. Number with factor 9 antibodies, none. And then if we look at the material being used, we can see in relation to cryoprecipitate, factor 8 units, 376,190. And then we can see haemophil, 271,970 units, and cryobuline, 151,686 units. So a mix there of cryoprecipitate, and then in terms of factor concentrates, haemophil and cryobuline, as Dr. Main has explained in her statements. And then we can see in relation to NHS factor 9 concentrate, it's the Oxford product, 101,000 units. And then there is a small amount of commercial factor 9 concentrate, 11,500. So it would appear her recollection that it wasn't used at all until the 1980s was incorrect. But it appears used there in fairly moderate quantities. There's no form available or separate form that we have for von Willebrand's disease patients. If we look just below the table, it says where there are 4 asterisks, please do not include von Willebrand's disease patients on this form, but we don't have the form for 1976 for von Willebrand's patients. If we could then turn to the annual return 2 years later, 1978, show me that's HCDO 301231. And if we could go first of all to page 7. And if we could zoom in on the top, thank you. So annual return for 1978. Again, we see Professor Nelson and Dr. Main. Dr. Bridges' name is also there. And it's right to note that at this point in time, there's a single return which covers usage at the Children's Hospital as well. So it all gets caught up on these annual returns rather than there being a separate return. Total number of haemophilic patients treated during the year 51. Number with factor 8 antibodies 9. Number of Christmas disease patients treated during the year 4. And then there's a figure of total amount used to treat these patients during the year, which is 1,352,607. And then if we go further down to look at the table, we can see there cryoprecipitate being used, 200 and, I'm not sure whether that's 50 or 60,000.
I think it's 50.
I think it might be as well. 250,646 units of factor 8. And then we can see usage of NHS factor 8, 186,992. So although other materials we've looked at would suggest that NHS factor 8 concentrate wasn't available, it appears there was some availability, at least. Haemophil, 290,599,000. Cryobuline, 334,000 to 390. And then the factor 9 concentrate has been put in the wrong column. We can see from the arrow, 144,660 units. And then there's some use of fibra and proplex, which I think would have been in relation to patients with inhibitors. If we go over the page, we then have information specifically about the material used for haemophilia A patients with factor 8 antibodies, so inhibitors, and we can see there the amounts being used, a small amount of NHS concentrate, haemophil, and then we see a factor 9 concentrate, it's a Highland manufactured Proplex. So again, there is some evidence of commercial factor 9 usage, and then fibre or fibre at 41,000 units. And if we just go further down the page, we can see a further 11,500 units of another material. And there's an explanation in handwriting about the use of that for one of the inhibitor patients. If we then go on a further 2 pages, Shomek, we do have the separate form for von Willebrand's patients for 1978. We can see 7 patients treated during the year. Cryoprecipitate, 214,716 units. And then if we go down to the bottom, we can see there's then a small amount of usage of immunofibrinogen. Now, those are the... sorry, go on before I make my observation. 2 further pages. Sorry, Shomek. There's a covering letter from Dr. Main to Ms. Spooner dated the 18th of April 1979, enclosing the 1978 returns, and she says a few patients are treated in the peripheral hospitals, and I find it impossible to obtain accurate records of therapeutic materials such as cryoprecipitate used in these hospitals. So there may be some inaccuracy in the cryoprecipitate figures. She says the enclosed results are as accurate as possible under the circumstances. Those are the overall forms. But if we go back to page 1, and if we can see if we can get the form the right way round, Shomek. What you'll see here, sir, are details of what individual patients received and being submitted to Oxford. And we can see, if we look at the right-hand side, there's the heading type of material received during 1978. Please tick the appropriate column. Now, all those that are shown on this page, there is only one tick in relation to the patient, so they're receiving one form of product only. But if we go to the next page, and again, if we turn it the other way up, we'll see there that there are some patients who receive more than one type of treatment. So the first patient, for example, there's a tick in the cryoprecipitate column, there's a tick in the Edinburgh factor 8 column, and a tick in the haemophil column. And the third patient, again, we see receiving cryoprecipitate, Elstree factor 8, and haemophil. The fourth patient is identified as receiving haemophil and cryobilin and other materials, as is the last patient listed on this page, haemophil, cryobilin, and other materials. And I won't go through all of them, but if we go over the page, we'll see, for example, the third patient down identified as receiving Elstree factor 8, haemophil, and other materials. If we go on just 2 further pages, please, Shomek. Again, we can see if we look at the last 2 patients listed, we see one receiving Elstree and haemophil, another receiving Elstree, haemophil, and other products and so on. So the policy of keeping patients on one type of product, concentrate product only, does not appear to have been entirely successful. And we continue to see cryoprecipitate usage as well for a number of patients who are also receiving factor concentrates. That's 1978. If we can go to the next return, which is 1979, it's HCDO 301300. We can see from the top of the page, annual return for 1979. The director is now solely Dr. Main, so she's taken over from Professor Nelson. Total number of haemophilic patients treated during the year 63, 10 with antibodies. Christmas disease patients treated during the year 2, none with factor 9 antibodies. And then if we look at the table, we can see still usage of cryoprecipitate, but decreasing in quantity, 120,000. Again, some usage of NHS factor 8 concentrate, 135,483. And then we can see the relatively small amount of CoA being used, 27,160. And that presumably reflects the purchase made as evidenced by the exchange of correspondence with Mr. Williams of Speywood. The timing fits in that regard. So a third commercial concentrate being used in 1979. And then we see the figures for Haemophilia and cryobilin significantly greater than the previous year. 557,655 units of Haemophilia, 440,051 units of cryobilin, and then in terms of NHS factor 9 concentrate, 194,180, and no commercial factor 9 concentrates used. If we go over 2 pages, we can see the form for inhibitor patients. So we see a breakdown there, Haemophilia used, NHS factor 9 used, and FEBA used. And then if we go to page 6, we see there haemophilia carrier treated during the year with immunoconcentrate, and then the next page tells us in relation to von Willebrand's, we have 8 patients treated during that year. Cryoprecipitate is the treatment of primary choice, 176,333 units. And then we see there an entry for DDABP. So that's the first time it appears, and it appears specifically in relation to von Willebrand's patients, not in relation to any haemophilia A patients. If we go to the next page, we'll see similar information as we saw from the previous return. And again, we can see that there are some patients who are receiving more than one type of material. So simply by way of example, the first patient listed receives cryoprecipitate and Haemophilia and fibre. And then if we go over the page, again, this is just by way of example. The first patient receives cryoprecipitate, Elstree factor 8 and Haemophilia. And then the patient 4 rows up from the bottom receives cryoprecipitate, Elstree factor 8, Haemophilia and cryobilin. And again, there are further examples of a number of patients receiving more than one type of concentrate, as well as continuing to receive cryoprecipitate in addition to factor concentrates. There are a number of pages, I won't go through the detail of them, but the inquiry has that data which show that it wasn't clearly always possible to adhere to a treatment policy of treating patients with only one type of concentrate at all times.
Is there a broad correlation between those who are moderate as opposed to severe haemophilia A patients, in that the moderates tend to be given the variety of product more than the severely affected?
The data on this page would be consistent with that. I haven't checked through line by line for all the returns for which we have this data to see whether that's the case, but we can do so. But we'll have a look overnight, sir, and I can let you know tomorrow what that tends to suggest. We don't have this data for every year. We only have it for some of the years. Just sticking with the information that appears to have been sent with the 1979 annual returns, if we go to page 18, Seamus, we can see that data was also sent to Oxford setting out hepatitis B status, and you'll see that in the right-hand column. And there's no or not known for a majority of patients, no for a majority of patients, but there are some for whom we see yes as the answer in that column in terms of hepatitis B antigen status. And if we go to the next page, so there's 2 on that page, there are 7 on that page answered yes in that column. If we go over to the following page, there are 4 with a yes in that column, and on the last page there is 1 with a yes in that column. So those are the returns for 1979. We then have returns for 1980 at HCDO 301394. If we just zoom in a little closer, thank you, we can see the director there is Dr. Main, and Professor Bridges also given, reflecting the fact that there was a single return covering the Haemophilia Reference Centre itself, but also the treatment at the Children's Hospital. So this is the 1980 annual return. Total number of Haemophilia A patients treated during the year 65. Total number of von Willebrand's disease patients treated during the year 8. And you'll see the forms changed in 1980. So here we have a form specifically for Haemophilia A carriers and von Willebrand's. And then the table is broken down into home treatment and hospital treatment. So if we look at the table itself, we can see cryoprecipitate for hospital treatment. Again, the amount used has come down from the previous year. It's 71,370, none used for home treatment. The amount of NHS factor 8 concentrate used is recorded as 120,672. That's all for inpatient treatment, none for home treatment. And then we can see earlier than the other documents had suggested, the introduction of ARMA factor 8. So this would suggest that was in use in 1980. Quite why and how that fits in with the other documentation and Dr. Main's explanations of her treatment policy are unclear. 93,322 units of factor 8. No co-8 this year, so it looks as though the purchase from Mr. Williams of Speywood may have been a one-off. And then we see haemophil, 520,887. That's all for hospital treatment. And then in terms of cryobuline for the home treatment programme, so a smaller amount used in hospital, 63,809, and a much larger amount used for home treatment, 597,761. We'll see there's also then some reference to porcine product being used.
The figure in brackets, does that refer to the number of people then on home treatment?
I think it does. It's certainly consistent with what Mr. Williams' understanding had been in autumn 1978 of the number of patients on home treatment. So yes, that would seem highly likely. Porcine factor 8 concentrate being used, we can see 13,420, and then the immunofiber product 84,500. So you'll note no reference to DDAVP being used at all. And then if we look across to the right-hand side, we'll see for von Willebrand's disease patients, the only product identified used is cryoprecipitate, and that's all in hospital. If we go to page 3, we can see the figures for haemophilia B in that year, 4 patients treated, and the product used is NHS factor 9 concentrate, 17,560 in hospital, 32,870 for home treatment. There's also then an NB, 564,000 units used to treat, I'm not quite sure what the next word is.
Several, I think.
Several inhibitor patients.
That looks as though it's not addressing haemophilia B.
Yes, so I think it's not entirely clear. We've got the usage for haemophilia B patients in the main body of the table. It looks like Dr. Main wanted to record additional usage of factor 9 for haemophilia A patients with inhibitors somewhere in the returns, and she's put it there.
Yes.
And again, if we go to the next page, we see in slightly different format, but again, the same information being submitted about materials used. This one's slightly harder to read, but again, there's some patients are only receiving a single type of material. But if we go to the next page, we see a number of patients receiving more than one type of material. So, for example, the patient that's about 5 lines down is receiving both Highland and Immuno. We can see those 2 ticks in columns next to each other. A little further down, about just over halfway down the page, there's a patient receiving Highland and Oxford Factor 9 and Armour, and then a patient who's down as receiving Highland and Immuno, and then some patients just receiving one single product. And that pattern, again, I won't go through all of it, but that pattern continues over the following pages, with a number of patients receiving more than one concentrate, including more than one type of commercial concentrate. So that's 1980. The next return we have is for 1983, and that is HCDO 40153_003. So the first document is in relation to haemophilia A and von Willebrand's patients. So we see total number of haemophilia A patients treated during the year 72. Not quite clear what is written under them. It looks like it might be a 2 for the number of carriers of haemophilia A. And then von Willebrand's disease patients treated during the year 16. And then if we look at the table for haemophilia A patients, the amount of cryoprecipitate has come right down to 18,210. Volume of NHS factor concentrate, not dissimilar from previous years, 159,090. And then we can see by 1983 a very significant amount of Armour factor 8 being used. And that's for both inpatient treatment and home treatment. It's now the largest amount used for home treatment in 1983. So the inpatient treatment for factor 8 is 289,630. The total used for home treatment is 505,844. There's rather less haemophil being used, 128,983 inpatient treatment. Cryobunin is still being used to a small extent in hospital, 27,419, and to a significant extent for home treatment, 422,497. But it is apparent that there are now 2 commercial products being used for home treatment, factor 8 and cryobunin, which it doesn't appear to, well, it accords with what Dr. Maynor said in some parts of her evidence, but not elsewhere. We can then, if we look towards the bottom of the column, see porcine factor 8 being used, 609,935. Fibre 156,870 and Autoplex 3,500. No, sorry, I've got those numbers from the wrong round. Autoplex 156,870, Fibre 3,500. And those, I think, we see elsewhere offer patients with inhibitors. And then in the column carriers for haemophilia A, we can see a small amount of cryoprecipitate, 8,500. Von Willebrand's, again, cryoprecipitate is the only product used, 55,710 in hospital, 145,020 home treatment. So we can see there cryoprecipitate is used for home treatment for von Willebrand patients. No reference, you'll note, sir, to DDAVP usage. That's the first part of the 1983 return. There's a specific form in relation to the inhibitor cohort of patients. That's HCDO 40153_004. We can see there are 9 patients treated during 1983 who had factor 8 antibodies, i.e. inhibitors, and we'll see that they have been treated with factor 8, so the Armour product, in hospital, 166,503 units. Some treatment with haemophil in hospital, 56,000, and with cryobunin, 13,434. And then the largest volume is the high HC, the porcine product, the Spaywood product, 609,935. And then we see the figures given for Autoplex, 156,870, and Fibre, 3,500. and she's noted at the bottom 5 patients responded well to porcine Hy8C. And then just to complete the picture for 1983, if we can go to HCDO 40153_005, we have the figure for haemophilia B patients. 5 patients treated during the year, and we can see the usage is the NHS factor 9 concentrate, both in hospital and at home in the quantities there set out. The last, sorry, not the last return we have, the penultimate return we have is for 1984. Shomik, that's HCDO 301789. And we can see these are the annual returns for 1984. Total number of haemophilia A patients treated in 1984, 82. 1 haemophilia A carrier, 8 von Willebrand disease patients. And then we can then see for the haemophilia A patients the product used. Cryoprecipitate in hospital, so that's gone up from the previous year, 190,560. NHS factor 8 concentrate has gone up significantly, and that may be because of the arrangements that were made with Scotland, which I'll come on to. 525,710 units used in hospital, 69,810 for home treatment. We can see that, again, there's very substantial usage of the Armour product, factor 8, 506,184,000 in hospital, 394,800 for home treatment. Haemophil usage has gone right down to a modest 24,240 units in hospital. And then cryobuline is used entirely for home treatment, 441,408 units. So those on home treatment receiving cryobuline, factor 8, and NHS factor 8 concentrate. And then if we look at the bottom of the page in terms of the porcine factor 8 concentrate, we'll see a very substantial figure, 777,776. And we can see that approximately 2/3 of that was used on 1 patient. And then carriers of haemophilia A, cryoprecipitate, 4,000 units in hospital. Von Willebrand's disease patients, the volume has gone up, but it appears to be only in hospital, not home treatment. And that's 1,108,800 is the figure there given. The significance of looking at the concentrates used in 1983 and 1984 will become particularly apparent later when we look at the numbers infected with HIV and the dates of seroconversion, because the available evidence suggests that for the majority of those who seroconverted to HIV, the seroconversion took place in 83 or 84, or indeed in I think at least one case 85.
Yes.
So those are the haemophilia A and von Willebrand's figures. If we go to the next page, we see the breakdown in relation to the 8 patients treated with factor 8 antibodies. NHS factor 8 concentrate, 47,920, and then receiving Armour and Travenol in the fairly the smaller quantities there set out, and then much larger quantities of porcine factor 8 as set out on the previous page. NHS factor 9 concentrate used for inhibitor patients, 202,300. Again, I should have observed I didn't in relation to the previous page, no reference to DDAVP at all. Next page gives us haemophilia B information, 4 patients treated in 1984, and we can see again for that year the sole product recorded is the NHS factor 9 concentrate, 120,215 for hospital and 30,315 for home treatment. So I should say, if we just go to the next page, we do have some data for this year in terms of individual patients. Again, we'll look and see overnight if we can trace any correlation through in terms of the severity or otherwise of the haemophilia A. But there are, if we look, for example, towards the bottom of the page, 5 and 4 entries up from the bottom of the page, we can see 2 patients ticked as receiving both ARMA concentrate and immunoconcentrate. And there are further examples on the next page. And a number of patients for whom there is a tick in the ARMA column and in the immuno column, and indeed for some of them in the Edinburgh factor 8 column. And that's a pattern that continues over the following pages. So whilst there are still some who receive only one type of material, there are others who receive 2 or sometimes 3 types of material. The last set of returns I'm going to go to is from 1986, so we're now into the era of largely heat-treated product. HCDO 40/362_008. So the returns for 1986, 81 haemophilia A patients treated, 2 haemophilia A carriers, 11 with von Willebrands. We see there for the haemophilia A patients a very small amount of cryoprecipitate used in hospital, 3,780, a much larger volume of NHS factor 8 concentrate, and the evidence suggests that the Scottish heat-treated product was being used. Not necessarily exclusively, but in part. So that's 1,421,490. And then we see alpha prophylate being used, ARMA factor 8, and Travenol Haemophil all being used. Presumably by this time heat-treated. And then in relation to patients, presumably patients with inhibitors, porcine factor 8 and autoplexin fibre. And then a reference to DDAVP being used for 2 patients. So DDAVP makes a late appearance here in 1986. And then we have the figures for von Willebrands and the carriers of haemophilia A treated with cryoprecipitate. And if we just go over
Well, just before we do, there's no cryoglin.
That's right, no cryoglin at all.
So the switch away from cryoglin is sometime in 85, 86.
Yes, we don't have the return for 1985, unfortunately. But yes, between 1984 and 1986, that shift has taken place. And it may reflect what was available in terms of heat-treated product. In terms of haemophilia B, it's the 4th page. And we can see 4 patients with haemophilia B treated, all with NHS factor 9 product, both in terms of hospital and home treatment. So that's what the returns tell us. There's one further document from Dr. Main from 1985 I should invite you to look at. It's BHCT 40503. So we looked at it earlier. It's the 1st of August 85 document, and if we go to the 2nd page, we looked at it earlier for a snapshot of the number of patients registered in 84-85. We now look at the bottom half of this page. We see what Dr. Main was writing in August 1985. I'll pick it up with the sentence I read before. In order to simplify the treatment of these patients, all the blood products necessary for treatment are held at the reference centre and issued to other hospitals in the province, specifically designated for individual patients. Some 38 patients with haemophilia A and 1 with haemophilia B are on home treatment, so that's the figure by August 85. This implies that they retain their own supplies of factor 8 and with the help of relatives inject themselves as soon as a bleed occurs. Up until December 1984, the treatment was virtually all commercial imported material, and up until the end of 1982, this all originated, and the all does not appear to be borne out by the returns, from Immuno in Vienna, namely European factor 8. Thereafter, the scare and implications for AIDS made great inroads into the European supplies, Therefore, we were grateful to receive American material from Armour Pharmaceutical Company Limited. They were already regular suppliers of material for inpatient surgery. So Dr. Main is here suggesting that the lack of availability of the the immuno product was because of the concerns about AIDS and a greater desire for European material. Slightly curious wording to suggest, therefore, grateful to receive American material, but in any event, you'll see the figures there set out. I haven't done the maths to see how they correlate with the returns, but we can do that. And you'll see she says NHS Factor 8 only became available in December 1982. Again, that doesn't appear to be completely accurate when we look at the returns. But that's what...
Well, that plainly doesn't fit with the returns,
No.
that last comment.
No.
The other, can we just go up back to the number of patients referred to in this earlier, because that, I think, comes to 189. The latest return, the return for 1984, showed there were 95 patients, that includes 4 with haemophilia B, and the 1986, 98.
Yes, the returns show the number of patients treated.
So about half, roughly, of the patient cohort received no treatment during the year.
That would seem to follow, and that's not dissimilar to what we've seen in other centres, where those who are mild haemophiliacs don't necessarily require any treatment for years. If we go over the page, back to the first page, which is the second page of the document, Dr. Main says this in the first paragraph: it's clear from these figures that the increased use of NHS material should have produced an economy in the purchase of commercial material, but due to extensive orthopaedic surgery being necessary following a series of road traffic accidents and bone fractures, the increase in NHS material was inadequate for needs. And then she says this: from December 1984, all commercial material and NHS material has been ordered by us through the Regional Blood Transfusion Service to enable at long last a regional budgeting system to exist for the haemophilic population of Northern Ireland. So it would appear that prior to that date, it was ordered directly by the centre, by Dr. Main, and that's the date she's giving at the point in time at which she places the order through the Blood Transfusion Service. She goes on to talk about particular usage in relation to patients with inhibitors. If we then go to BHCT 40907, this is really to complete the picture in relation to the introduction of heat-treated products. Can we go to the third page? This is a letter from Professor Bloom to Haemophilia Centre directors, 9th of April 1985, and it's a questionnaire that he's asking the centre directors to complete, and he wants to assess the demand for heat-treated factor 8 and 9 concentrates. If we can then go to page 2, we can see Dr. Main's completion of the questionnaire. Are you still using unheated commercial factor 8? No. Are you still using unheated BPL factor 8? No. Are you using cryoprecipitate occasionally for children? Are you using heat-treated commercial factor 8 occasionally? Are you using heat-treated BPL factor 8? No. Unheated BPL factor 9? No. Heat-treated commercial factor 9? No. Have you had any significant financial restrictions on purchase of concentrates? No. And then the completion makes sense when we read what's set out below. The Northern Ireland Centre is being provided with heat-treated 8, I'm not quite sure what the next word is, from Scotland, and 9, unheated 9, looks like that says, from the same place. So the writing's not entirely clear, but in any event, they're being supplied by this time from Scotland, and we'll look at the arrangements for that in a little more detail.
That's material, I think. The word after 9.
Yes, you might be right. So it appears to be heat-treated factor 8 material from Scotland and looks like unheated 9 material from the same place, I think is what it says. I'm not entirely certain about those last 2 words.
Same source.
Yes, I think you're right, sir. So that's what the contemporaneous or near contemporaneous documentation tells us about actual product usage. So we've seen from the materials looked at so far that the home treatment programme commenced in the mid-70s. 74 seems to be the likeliest date, although one of Dr. Mayne's statements recalls it as being around 1976. If we look at her statement at WITN 0736006, and I'm looking for paragraph 8, Seamus. Again, sorry, I haven't got a page number recorded. Paragraph 8, sorry. Let's try the previous page. Yes. So we've got figures there in paragraph 8. She says there a figure of 43 on home treatment. She then gives the figures about how many became HIV positive. Again, I'm going to come back to that. And then she says in the last sentence of paragraph 8, the final number included in the HT group may be 43 or 47. My memory eludes me. So that's her recollection as to the numbers of home-treated patients. It's not entirely clear where that figure derives from. In terms of the approach to home treatment, we've seen reference to patients treating themselves prophylactically in some of the materials we've looked at. And that's also addressed by Dr. Mayne in an article in 1979. If we could go to HSOC 0022869. If we go to, so this is, a bulletin, number 3 of 1979, so the Haemophilia Society magazine. If we go to the second page, we look in the right-hand column, annual general meeting in Manchester. We can see there was a lecture given by Dr. Mayne, and she's then subsequently produced her recollection of what it was she set out, because the tape recording of the proceedings had failed. If we look at the next page in any event, the middle column, top half of the page, the second paragraph, she says, beginning to this end, she says this about prophylaxis. To this end, I feel that prophylactic treatment with factor 8 has a lot to offer a family to avoid these stressful situations developing. Certainly, I have found that coming up to exams, etc., a small dose of factor 8 is all that is necessary to keep the haemophilic on an even keel. I think it's because he realises that people are concerned, and in some way this sorts out the bleeding problems. I often feel as doctors we worry too much about the number of bleeds that each haemophilic patient has. It always seems to me to be so much more important to realise that despite having no clotting activity of factor 8 in their blood, they do not bleed each and every day. So some advocacy for prophylactic treatment, and we can see that in the right-hand column. We just go a little further down the page, Seamus. So the last paragraph of the article, it's the last paragraph, thank you, right-hand side. It says, in summary, I think the medical profession needs to provide time, need to seek to have some permanent staff available for chat sessions, etc., etc. And then she says this, to encourage patients with inhibitors to meet and try to establish a lifestyle that suits them, to use prophylactic factor 8 in a wise fashion to help patients over stressful periods of time, and to operate as widespread a home treatment programme as is locally possible. So it would appear Dr. Main an enthusiastic advocate of home treatment, and that's clear from other materials, but also an advocate of a degree of prophylaxis in terms of the approach to home treatment. We can take that down, thank you. In terms of the particular arrangements for the supply of products, we saw an example of Dr. Milne communicating directly with Mr. Williams of Speywood about CoA8 and High8C. And there is also correspondence which shows her in communication with BPL and with PFL arranging for concentrate for particular patients. It appears to be very much Dr. Main's role to make the arrangements in the 70s and in the early years of the 1980s for the procurement of the factor concentrates that she wished to use. There is then, in the first years of the 1980s, the issue about supply from Scotland. And I just want to pick that up and show you various documents relating to it. So as well as commercial concentrates, NHS concentrate was received from Scotland. And if we go to PRSE 303946, we can see there at the Haemophilia Centre Directors meeting of the 30th of September 1980. Dr. Bridges was not there. He's in the list of apologies, but he was represented by Dr. Main. And if we go to page 7, please, Seamus. Bottom half of the page. About 10 lines up from the bottom, it says, Dr. Main inquired whether any way could be found of fractionating plasma collected from Northern Ireland. Dr. Wolford, that's Dr. Diana Wolford from the Department of Health, said that this problem was being looked into. So that's where we see Dr. Main raising the question of fractionating Northern Irish plasma, because there was no facility in Northern Ireland for the plasma to be fractionated and for concentrates to be prepared, although Northern Ireland was able to produce its own cryoprecipitate. We can then pick the picture up a few months later with CBLA 301294. This is a Department of Health internal document from February 1981, and it's a report for the Advisory Committee on the NBTS, the National Blood Transfusion Service. The background is set out in the first paragraph. As members know, so the heading is Pro Rata Distribution of Blood Products. As members know, from 1st of April 1981, it is intended to introduce a system of pro rata distribution of certain blood products to ensure that regional health authorities receive such products in proportion to the quantity and quality of plasma sent to the Blood Products Laboratory, BPL, for fractionation. Regional health authorities have accepted the principle of pro rata distribution for factor 8, factor 9 and albumin-containing products. This paper puts forward for the Advisory Committee's consideration possible arrangements for the distribution of these products. And then in paragraph 2, it explains the current position in relation to what BPL were producing, currently producing about 14 million international units of factor 8 used in the treatment of haemophiliacs. Balance of demand is met by cryoprecipitate manufactured by regional transfusion centres and by imported commercial products. Paragraph 3 sets out the present distribution arrangements. So it says, in common with other BPL products, factor 8 is distributed broadly on the basis of an assessment of regional requirements for patients' treatment. That assessment is based mainly upon the number of haemophiliacs treated within each region in a given year. This system is in effect weighted to take account of the spread of haemophiliacs throughout the country. So that was the existing system. And then details are given in the next system paragraph of the proposed change in system, pro rata distribution. BPL will calculate how many international units of factor 8 are due to each regional health authority based upon the quantity and quality of plasma supplied. And then further detail is given in relation to that. And then we see over the page a particular issue in relation to how this is going to impact upon Northern Ireland. So it's the bottom half of the page. Other users. So it's set out in the top half of the page how it's going to work for the average regional health authority. And then there are certain specific categories set out: Channel Islands, Army, Catholic Children's Pilgrimage Trust, and then Northern Ireland. The Northern Ireland Blood Transfusion Service currently receives over 1,000 vials a year from BPL. So that will explain why we do see NHS factor concentrate appearing in the returns. However, the service, that's the Northern Ireland Blood Transfusion Service, is unable as yet to supply fresh frozen plasma, and under the pro rata system will not be entitled to factor 8. This has been discussed between the services director and Dr. Lane, director of BPL. Northern Ireland BTS is expected to increase its production of cryoprecipitate to make up for the loss of factor 8 supplies from BPL, and in the longer term is exploring the advantages and disadvantages of transporting fresh frozen plasma to BPL or PFC at Edinburgh. The Northern Ireland Blood Transfusion Service's difficulty lies both in freezing plasma and in keeping it frozen on a journey to Elstree or Edinburgh. Following discussions between officials of DHSS and the Department of Health and Social Services in Northern Ireland, it is suggested that the principle of pro rata be applied to the Northern Ireland Blood Transfusion Service in the same way as to regional health authorities. So we see there's no difficulty, it would appear, in terms of production of cryoprecipitate, but the change to the pro rata distribution system is going to have the effect of Northern Ireland no longer receiving anything from BPL. If we go to the next page, we can see under the heading Summary, paragraph 10, the committee's views were then being sought on a number of matters, including at 10C4, application of pro rata to Northern Ireland. And if we just go on to further pages, we just see a table which sets out what's said to be the current monthly allocation. And if we go down to Belfast, which is we see the last two entries, Belfast and Jersey, the current monthly allocation in terms of vials is said to be 90, and under the pro rata process, it'll be 0. So it will receive nothing in terms of BPL concentrate. What was done to address that was an arrangement with Scotland. I want to look at a handful of documents in this regard, but first of all, if we go to a document that summarises the overall position, it's RHSC 5066_024. This is just a later document which picks up, it's from 1989, and it's called Blood Transfusion Service Financial Position on Baseline Funding. If we go to the second page, we can see under the heading Blood Products, we can see reference there to blood products being received from the Protein Fractionation Centre in Edinburgh. And then it explains that prior to 1982, so prior to the pro rata distribution scheme, most blood products provided through the Blood Transfusion Service were acquired from BPL at Elstree free of charge. Since 1982, when the service was transferred to the PFCE, so that's Edinburgh, the Blood Transfusion Service has been required to pay for all products supplied. We can see that what resulted ultimately was the Blood Transfusion Service in Northern Ireland receiving NHS product from Edinburgh rather than BPL, and in turn supplying that to the Haemophilia Centre. If we just look at the next page, again before I then turn to some of the contemporaneous documents in relation to the Scottish arrangement, under the heading Supplies to the Haemophilia Centre, Royal Victoria Hospital, what's said there is all clotting agents, factor 8, factor 9, etc., are managed exclusively in the Haemophilia Centre, Royal Victoria Hospital, under Dr. Main, the Centre Director. all supplies of clotting agents, whether obtained from PFCE and routed through the Northern Ireland Blood Transfusion Service, or obtained directly from commercial sources, e.g. prophylate, Hyatt, Fever, Autoplex, must be delivered directly to the Haemophilia Centre. Mr. Carville, the Senior Chief MLSO in the Blood Bank, under the direction of Dr. Main, is responsible for the ordering and control of all clotting agent supplies. So again, very much decisions under the direct control of Dr. Main, and that is, in fairness, absolutely what she says in her witness statement, she was the person who was ordering the supplies. So just to return then to the Scottish picture, if we go to CBLA 301287.
This document is February 89.
Yes, it's a later document. It's just I referred to it partly because it just gives a later perspective on what happened. It confirms the switch took place. What's said there?
But I understood from what you'd shown us earlier that from the end of 1984, all the ordering was done through the blood transfusion service.
Yes, that's what Dr. Main had said in a document, but that doesn't appear to be what's said here.
No, this is the end of 84 position, if it isn't the current position.
It appears to be suggested that it's the current position in 1989. It certainly reflects everything we've seen about the pre-1984 position.
Yes.
I think to the extent that there's any lack of clarity or contradiction in the documents, it's probably for the period from 85 through to 88.
Yeah.
So if we go then to CBLA 301287, you'll recall we looked at the report to the Advisory Committee on the National Blood Transfusion Service about the switch to the pro-rata system, and we can see this is the meeting of the Advisory Committee on the 23rd of February 1981. It has amongst its observers a Dr. Lawson from the Department of Health and Social Services, Northern Ireland. And then if we go to the second page, halfway down the page, we can see a discussion beginning under the heading Pro Rata Supply of Blood Products. Obviously, we'll come back to this, how it impacts upon Trelaws, which is mentioned here, and more generally when we explore other aspects of the inquiry's work. But if we go to the next page, we can see what was decided in terms of Northern Ireland. Paragraph 9D, on the question of other users, members agreed that D, the pro-rata scheme should apply to Northern Ireland. Dr. Lawson explained that the Northern Ireland Blood Transfusion Service intended to send plasma, both time-expired and fresh frozen, to the Protein Fractionation Centre, Edinburgh. This had been agreed by the directors concerned. So that's how the pro-rata scheme is now intended to apply. Belfast will receive its NHS plasma from Scotland rather than from BPL. And if we go to SCGV 40104_134, we can see a letter between Belfast and Scotland. It appears to be between the respective health departments of the two countries. 7th of May 1981. Dear Macpherson, this is someone in the Scottish Home and Health Department, supply of blood products to Northern Ireland. I understand you've been aware of preliminary discussions between the director of the Protein Fractionation Centre in Edinburgh and Dr. McClelland of the Northern Ireland Blood Transfusion Service about a transfer of the Northern Ireland source of supply for blood products from Elstree to Liberton. I've received official confirmation from our Eastern Health and Social Services Board, which has administrative responsibility for the blood transfusion service in Northern Ireland, of its wish to pursue this proposal, and I'm therefore writing to seek your department's agreement in principle. He then refers to enclosing a note of the quantities of plasma they are aiming to provide, what they'd like to receive. And then it says, subject to agreement being reached, Northern Ireland should be in a position to send its plasma, both time expired and fresh frozen, to Liberton by October 1981. because of the 6-month period required to process the raw material, it will be March 1982 before we receive any finished products. In the meantime, I'm also writing to DHSS London seeking their agreement to the continuation of arrangements with Elstree to cover this interim period. And then there's a reference also to receipt of anti-D products, which Liverton is unable to provide. Over the page, I don't need to go to the detail of it, but those are the figures suggested as to what the Northern Ireland Blood Transfusion Service hope to make available and what they hope to receive on a pro rata basis from Edinburgh. So that's an arrangement that began in around 1981, 1982. There's a further letter which discusses the continuation of the arrangement in 84. That's NIBS 301721, and I'll make this the last document before we break. It's from a Dr. Dara of the Eastern Health and Social Services Board to Dr. Main, 25th of May 1984. And it says in the first paragraph, we've recently been monitoring the success of the blood fractionation arrangements with the Scottish Health Services. So just pausing there, May 1984, so we're not yet in the heat-treated product territory in terms of what was being received in Belfast. We've received advice that there is now a sufficiency of the NHS product to cover all current demand for factor 8. And then it's over the last few months, it's become apparent that there may be a category of patients for whom the NHS product may not be satisfactory. You may recall that we embarked on the in-house production in response to a number of issues, one of which was the major financial outlay on commercial products. At the time, there was apparently a clearly defined national policy endorsed by the profession to move towards self-sufficiency with the implicit assumption that the NHS product would be an equivalent therapeutic substitute. In reviewing the local scene, we perceive that there are substantial numbers of people for whom the NHS product does not appear to be appropriate. Quite why that's said to be the case is unclear. Since the policy to which we subscribe through the DHSS is to use in-house products and funding has been diverted to underwrite this arrangement, we will require to have substantial clinical evidence to obtain finance for the continued use of the commercial products. And then the last paragraph on this page, he says, will you please provide us with the names and clinical reasons why the NHS product is not appropriate to those individuals who you envisage as likely to continue to need the commercial product. So it's a somewhat curious letter. We haven't traced a response to it from Dr. Main, I think. But it confirms at least that the arrangement with Scotland was still continuing as at May 1984, and it appears to contemplate, for financial reasons, a desire to move away from the use of commercial concentrates towards a greater use of NHS products. And I think that's probably all that we can glean from that document.
Well, it actually says that there's enough NHS product to cover everyone's needs.
Yes, it does. Yes, whether that is relating solely to Scottish or a combination of Scottish and BPL products, unclear. Or unclear from this letter at least. So there are a small number of other documents to look at on the issue of the arrangements with Scotland, but we can perhaps do that after lunch.
We'll take a break until 2 o'clock.
Yeah.
2 o'clock.